So in the last video, we learned about get routes inside Laravel in order to get information from inside the URL and show a certain piece of content inside our website. But in this video, we're going to talk about post routes, which are a little bit more useful when it comes to, for example, let's say you want to create a login system and you want a person to sign up inside your website and actually store the user's username and password and stuff like that inside a database so you can actually have a login system. That's the kind of thing we would use a post route for, because we basically grab data and do something with it. So to begin with, as you can see, my project looks a little bit different than the last episode because I did actually go inside my views folder and I deleted all the pages we created except for the front page, which is called home.blade.php. And inside my web.php file, which is inside the routes folder, I did actually go in and deleted all the routes except for the one that just shows the front page. And then open up my website inside the browser so you can actually see what we have here. You can see that I just have a basic home text message, which is the same thing I have inside my actual template, which is inside my views folder. So you can see this is my HTML page. I scroll down, I just have an H1 that says home. So this is basically all I have inside this project here. So going back inside our web.php file, I want to start creating a route, which is a post type route. So I'm going to go down below here and I'm just going to create a comment just so we know exactly what this is. Then down below, I'm going to create the route keyword, just like we did with the get method up here. So we're going to say route : and then I'm going to say we want to create a post type route, parentheses, and then we're going to say semicolon. Now there's going to be two parameters inside this parentheses here. The first one is going to be what are we looking for in order for this post route to actually run. And then the second one is going to be what actually gets run if we find what we're looking for. So the first parameter is going to be, for example, a URL. So we can say /form submitted. Again, this can be anything really that you decide that this is going to be. I'm just creating an example here just to show what it could be. The second parameter is going to be a function, parentheses, curly brackets. Then we're going to go down. And basically the code that goes inside these curly brackets here are going to be what we actually run. And we could, for example, just return a message here where we say form submitted. Of course, right now, we're not really doing anything with data. We're not grabbing data or submitting it to a database or validating the data that gets sent to us. But right now, we're just doing a very basic return example here, just so we can see, is it actually working? So what we can do is let's go back inside our home page. And inside the home page, I'm going to go ahead and create a form, because we do actually want to test this out, right? So the form here is just going to be a very basic HTML form. Inside the action, we're going to type in a URL, and we did actually already tell our code what we were looking for. So if I go back inside our post method here, we do actually have a URL that says form submitted. So I'm just going to copy this, including the backslash. I'm going to go back inside my action, paste that in, and say that is where we're going to take this data to once we actually submit it. Then I'm going to go down and actually create a couple of inputs. So we're going to say input, and that something could, for example, if I go ahead and include a name attribute here, could, for example, be full name, just so we know that this is where the user types in their full name. We can also include a placeholder just so we can tell the user what to type in here. Again, this is very basic HTML stuff, right? This is not really PHP or Laravel. This is just like basic HTML. So we're going to go in and say, type your full name. I'm also going to go ahead and include an ID here, just so we know exactly what this is. So we could, for example, say full name. And above this one, I'm going to go ahead and create a label, because we need to label our inputs, because semantically that makes sense. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this is for full name. And the label is just going to be something very basic like full name, just so we have a little bit of a text on top of this input. Again, you could just not have a label if you don't want to do that. This is just more of an extra HTML thing that I'm doing here. So the last thing we could also include, just to make this completely correct HTML wise, is also include a required attribute. Now, required is something that I often get asked about, because whenever we do any sort of security when it comes to PHP, people will tell me, well, you don't need to check if an input is empty using PHP. You can just go inside your HTML and add a required attribute. And then you can't submit the form without typing something in. Well, this is actually something you can very easily remove inside the browser using the built-in developer tool. So if you have just a little bit of knowledge about browsers, you can very easily bypass this required attribute. But then again, it's just kind of nice to have there just for visual purposes, not for security reasons, but for visual purposes. Okay, so the required attribute is nice to have. It's not required, but it's a fun little pun because it says required. Now, just for example's sake, let's go ahead and add a second input here, because if I submit more than just one piece of data, then it would be kind of nice for you to know how to handle that as well if I were to insert it into a database or something. So let's go ahead and copy this input and paste it below. And let's just call this one something like email, right? Just so we have something. So we'll say email. I'm going to copy that inside the name attribute. And I'm also going to go ahead and say type your email. Then I'm also going to create a label. So I'm just going to copy paste again. And I'm just going to call this one email and say email. There's a lot of repetition going on here, but there we go. So now we have a full form. So now the last thing we need to include in here is of course a button, so we can actually submit this form. So we're going to say that this is a type equal to a submit. And then I'm just going to include some sort of text inside this submit button. This could be just submit, just so we, know what this does. And going back inside our form tag up here, we do of course also need to include what kind of method we're using in order to submit this data, because you can submit it using a get method or a post method. Now, because we want to do something with this data here, I'm going to go ahead and use a method called a post method. And with all this, we now have a form we can actually see inside our website. So if I were to go back inside my browser here, you can see that I do have my form. I can actually zoom in so you can actually see it. Let's also go ahead and put these on separate lines, because I think that will make a little bit more sense. So right after these, the first input, just going to add a HTML break. Going back inside the website, refreshing, you can now see that we have the forms here. I should probably add a second break. I know typically this is better done using CSS, but for now, because this is just a very quick example, there we go. Let's also go ahead and include it right after the second input, just so the button is not all the way up there. There we go. Okay, so going back inside our website, there's one more thing I want to do here, because something Laravel comes with is cross-site request forgery protection, which you can actually use directly inside your HTML in order to prevent any sort of cross-site request forgery, which is a type of hacking that we can use inside a website. So this is a security thing that you need to include anytime you do anything like this, where a user gives you any sort of data that you need to do something with. And that is actually a very easy thing to do using Laravel, because basically you just need to go inside your form and then include a @CSRF, and that's it. This here is a command that Laravel uses in order to go in and just by itself do a bunch of security stuff in order to protect your website. So adding this in is very important to do. It doesn't look like much, but it is very important. But now we are going to encounter a second issue before we can actually test this out. Because right now, if we were to save this and refresh my browser, if I were to actually try and type something inside my form, so right now you can see I've typed something in, blah, 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 and actually try and submit it, it's going to give us a URL not found. Because right now, because we said we wanted to go to /form submitted inside our action, inside the form, it is going to take us to localhost /form submitted, which is not the correct path to our website. If we were to go back here inside the form, you can see that right now our path is localhost /dashboard /first website, because that's the name of my website here, /public. This is the root directory, okay, for our website. This is where our front page is located, essentially. So we need to point to this first and then say /form submitted inside our form. And there's a couple of ways we can do that. So if we were to go back inside the form, right now we just have form submitted as our URL link, which is not working for us. So we do have something else we can do, which is add curly brackets And again, this is something we can do because we have a blade template inside this Laravel project here. So we can say curly bracket, URL, parentheses, and then we can say we want to add a / form submitted. Now, right now, because I do have double quotes around this, I do need to add single quotes instead. So we're just going to do this. And with this, it should actually be working inside our website. So if we were to refresh this and actually try and resubmit what I typed in, you can now see that we get form submitted inside our page here. So our post method or our post route is actually working. But this is actually not really like the best way of doing things, like including a path inside the URL here or inside the action. There is a slightly better way to do things. So if we were to go back inside my route here, we can include a name for this route. I think we talked about that in the last episode with named routes, right? So after the last parentheses, right before the semicolon, I'm going to say I want to point to a name, parentheses, and then inside of this name, I'm going to include a name I want to refer to. So I could say form submitted, which means that I can go back inside my blade template, go inside, and instead of saying URL, I can say route and simply give it the name of that particular route that we just created called form submitted, because that's what I included inside the name at the very end there. So I can say form submitted, like so. And this would also work the exact same way. So if we were to refresh everything, actually, let's go ahead and go back first, then refresh. Then I'm going to submit everything once more, like so. And then you can see we also get form submitted. So this also works, but the difference is that we can actually customize the name using a named route, okay? So slightly next level way of naming things, but a lot better when it comes to conventions. So now the next question is, how do we actually grab the data from the form? Because right now we're just returning form submitted, hey, but we're not actually doing anything with the data that we submitted with the full name and with the email. So what we can do is we can go inside this route here, and instead of returning a value, I can actually go in and actually grab the data. So let's go and create a variable. I'm just going to call this variable full name. And then I'm going to set it equal to $request, and I'm going to point to a input, parentheses, semicolon. Inside the input, we're going to go ahead and include in the name attribute we use with that particular input I want to grab. So right now, going back inside our form, you can see that right now the first input up here has a name attribute set to full name. So that is actually the one that I want to grab here. So we're going to say double quotes, then we're going to paste in full name. But as you can see, we're also getting a error message, and that's actually because right now we don't actually have access to the request object, so we can actually use it inside our code down here. The way we gain access to that is the exact same way we gained access to the route class. So we can actually use these route definitions here, and that is by going up and actually copy pasting the use statement, so we can import another class called request. So I'm going to say we want to not have route at the end there, but then I want to instead say we want to gain access to illuminate /http /request. And in this sort of way, we now have access to the request class. So what I want to do is I want to go down inside my post route that I have at the bottom here, go inside the function parentheses, and then I want to import a request object type. And I want to go ahead and grab a variable request, or just give that as a name, so that when I go inside my code down here and refer to variable request, I'm referring to this particular object up here. Okay, so this is going to allow for us to actually use methods from within the request class. And of course, we do have more than just full name, so I can go ahead and paste this below and say we also have a email and a email name attribute inside our second input. Okay, so this is how we can grab both pieces of data. And just to kind of show what exactly this is kind of the same as saying inside regular normal PHP code without any sort of Laravel framework. If I were to go in and create a variable and call this one full name, and then set it equal to a $_post, brackets, and then say I want to refer to a full name, which is the name attribute, just like up here from inside our input, right? So this is how you would grab it using regular PHP, but since we're using Laravel, we can do it like this instead. But now we do also need to make sure we validate the data coming in, because what if it needs to have a minimum amount of characters or maximum amount of characters, or if the data is required, just like we did inside the form when we added the required at the end right here. But then I said, wait, this is actually not secure because you can just remove it using the developer tool inside the browser. So therefore you need to do a required check inside your PHP code in order for this to actually be secure, right? To actually function. So what we can do to validate the data coming in is we can actually go ahead and do this in a slightly different way. So let me just comment this out for now. Like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab again the request object, but this time I'm going to point to a validate, which is another method we have inside our Laravel request class. Inside this validate method, we can include a couple of different parameters based on how much data you need to actually do something with. So I'm going to create brackets, and then I'm going to go down to the next line. And the first piece of data we had was one called name or full name. So we're going to say full name. And then I want to point to what kind of methods I want to use on this data here to check for certain things. So I'm going to say equal to, greater than, and then a couple of single quotes. And inside the single quotes, I'm going to list all the different validation checks I want to do. So I could, for example, say I want to check if this is required or that it is required. So basically, if the user has not typed anything inside this input, then they can't submit the data because it is required that they type something in. Now, if I want to add more than just one validation, I'm going to be using a pipe symbol in order to separate them. And then I could write minimum : 3 characters, for example. So this is going to require at least 3 characters. So like, if my name is Daniel, D-A-N would be like the minimum, right? I can't just write D-A and then it's not going to work. So it has to have 3 characters. And we can also include a max character. So this could be, let's say, 30 characters or something. So now we have something here that is going to allow for us to, do some validation checks. Then afterwards, I'm going to write comma, and that is important to do because if we have something else, then I can paste something else below. So I'm just going to go and copy this, paste it below, because we did also have an email. So in this one, I could also say required, minimum 3, maximum 30 if I wanted to. We do also have one related to email. So if I do want to make sure this needs to be registered as a proper email, then I can also say that we have a email validation check that I want to do. So I can also type email here. And then Laravel automatically checks, is this a proper email? And again, there's many different types of checks you can do. These are just some of the basic ones that I'm going to be showing you. So if you have more that you want to see, then you can always try and look up what kind of validations can you do when it comes to Laravel. So with this, we now need to do something with this data so we can actually see, is it actually working inside our website? For now, we're just going to go ahead and return it again, just so we can see the data inside the page that we're going to. But in a more practical sense, you would probably be uploading it to a database, which we could do in the next episode just to kind of show you how to do it. But let's just go ahead and return it for now. So let's go ahead and uncomment what we have down here, because we could just be using these if we wanted to reference to these data. So I could say I want to return a piece of string, like so. And inside the string, I could say your full name is, and then paste in full name. And then I can also say, and your email is, and then paste in the email. And in this kind of way, we now have the data. We can use it for something, for example, returning it inside the website for the user to use for something, I guess. You could also, just to show it here before we actually test this out, you could also just copy what we pasted in behind here with the request, point to input, full name, and just kind of replace that in here instead if you wanted to. Of course, right now, because we're inside a string, Need to make sure we're using single quotes instead. But this is also a valid way to do things if you wanted to. So saving this and then going back inside our website, going back, refreshing just so everything is reset. I'm going to type in Danny Crossing. Then I'm going to write test@gmail.com and just say submit. And then you can see your, and it's not actually showing. I'll get to in a second why it's not showing, because I know why it's not showing. Your full name is, and then it says full name, and your email is test@gmail.com. So the second part is working. The first part is not working because you need to make sure you wrap this inside curly brackets. Otherwise, it's just not gonna do what you want it to. Again, this is like a Laravel thing. So saving this, going back inside the website, refreshing, submitting it again. Now you get your full name is Danny Crossing and your email is test@gmail.com. So now imagine for people out there thinking, how can we use this in a real life example? Imagine for a second that instead of simply returning your full name and showing it inside the browser, that we then just kind of submit it to our database and insert a user into our website that has been registered as a new user, because we have the name, we have the email. Maybe this could be a username instead, but then we'll just submit it to a database and voila, we have a user inside our website, right? So this is how you would actually use a post method in order to do something with data from a form, in order to update a database or show the data inside the website or something that you might want to do. So now we're starting to move into like a more practical, we can actually use Laravel for something kind of example, which I hope you guys can realize, now you start to learn how to build websites using Laravel. So it's not just, a bunch of confusing gibberish and, it's a framework and how do you do things, like just basic things you know how to do using basic HTML and CSS and PHP and, but now you know how to do stuff, right? So with this, I hope you guys enjoyed and I'll see you guys next time.